Hello and welcome to the How Not to Screw Up Your Kids podcast, the bucket emptying episodes. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Han, psychologist and parenting expert. So, pour yourself a cuppa, find a comfy seat, and enjoy the conversation. In today's episode, I want to show you a really great bucket emptying sort of tool and strategy for your children that is the glitter jar. Now, obviously a glitter jar is rather lovely and beautiful and very aesthetic in your home, but it's also a superb way of explaining emotions to children and teens, whether that's big emotions around anger, frustration, annoyance, jealousy, or whether it is around overwhelm, stress, and anxiety. Now, if you are listening to this episode using the audio download through Spotify or Apple, I would really encourage you to also watch the video on our YouTube channel, because you'll be able to actually see the visual of the glitter jar, which I think it will be really helpful. So, of course, continue to listen to this one, but I would also encourage you to check out the video too. So here is a glitter jar I have prepared earlier. And for those of you that are worrying environmentally, it has got environmental glitter in it. So I find that this is a really helpful tool to have around. I have one permanently in my home. Whenever I go into schools, I also take one with me, which I create on the spot to explain to children and to teens, because it's such a simple but really powerful mechanism of explaining emotions and the connection between emotions and thoughts. And for so many young people, it's literally as if a light bulb switches on and they really understand that connection. Now, in itself, the glitter jar won't necessarily on its own be a strategy or a tool that will help a child in that big overwhelm moment, but it can be used in conjunction with other things to really help them and be a really powerful tool to help them in those moments. So, let me explain. I tend to use these larger glass jars because I just find the size just ends up being a more powerful way of explaining things. You can very easily use an old water bottle. It doesn't matter what you use. I just have a preference for these larger ones. So this is the simple way to explain it. So the idea is that the liquid, the water in this jar, is like our mind first thing in the morning. When we wake up, it's clear, it's calm, it's still. We can see through it, which means we can make, typically, we are more likely to make good choices because we're trying to make those choices amongst some real calm water. However, from the moment we wake up, we start thinking, and those thoughts are represented by the glitter. So the idea is that you would shake the jar or the bottle slightly, and we can begin to see, for those of you who are watching via video, that you can begin to see that the glitter is moving around, and that's our thoughts. It may well be, what time is it? Can I have 5 more minutes? What am I doing today? Have I packed my bag? I wonder what I might have for breakfast. Who am I going to spend time with? Whatever it is, we think all of the time, and those thoughts are represented by the glitter. But when we're thinking ordinarily, the glitter floats around within the calmness and that stability that is our mind. So we can still typically make good choices. When we experience a big emotion, whether that's frustration, anger, annoyance, stress, overwhelm, instead of just having a few thoughts, we become flooded with multiple thoughts. So you'll now see that this glitter jar is swirling with so many thoughts that might be feeding that annoyance, that frustration, that anger. And for those children who often worry about or talk about having a bit of a tummy ache because they're nervous or they're feeling anxious, this is exactly how they describe it. This is what it feels like in their tummy. So when we're experiencing that big overwhelm and that big feeling and the flooding with all of those thoughts and things are swirling around, the idea is it clear? No. Is it calm? No. Are we likely to make good choices? Probably not, because we have too much going on. There's no calmness, there's no clarity, there's no space for us to make those decisions, those better decisions. There's no right decision, there's no wrong decision, there are simply better choices that we can make. And it's often very difficult to make those choices in the middle of that experience of those big emotions and those flooding of thoughts and that flurry that comes round, whatever that is, about how angry we are, about how we're not clever enough, how we're not liked, how it's not fair, how it's frustrating, whatever that might be, is all happening and swirling around. What I find is when I'm explaining that to a young person, during that course of that explanation, you'll notice just in that conversation that I've had with you that the glitter jar and all that swirling glitter has now dissipated, and I've returned to clear and calm and still. And it actually hasn't taken very long. What we know is it takes 90 seconds to go from extreme big emotion, swirling thoughts, swirling feelings, swirling physiological reaction to calm if we use a very specific strategy. And this is beautifully illustrated by the glitter jar. Now, what I will say is important for us to note and to acknowledge with young people is that the thoughts around that frustration and that anger and that irritation are still there. They've settled at the bottom of the jar. What's crucial here is by settling at the bottom, it doesn't mean that those thoughts and that frustration and that irritation, that jealousy, that anxiety have disappeared. Not at all. What we've done is we've created space and calm to make different choices because of these thoughts. And so that's a really great way of illustrating the power of pressing pause, the power of using a 90-second strategy, whether that's a breathing technique, whether that's an affirmation, whether that's a mantra, that helps create that space. Because when we have that space, when we pressed pause, or we've created that space through another breathing technique, what we're doing is we're optimizing our ability to make a better choice, a choice that is more fitting of the version of our best self, a choice that is more helpful to us in that particular situation, which we're simply not going to be able to do when we're in that swirling overwhelm, but we are more likely to when we've created this calm. So it's helping them see that distinction. And because this is such a visual, it can be really helpful for young people, so that when we then speak about those big emotions, what we've now done by using the glitter jar is we've created a shared language around overwhelm, around swirling, around our chances of making a good choice. So what we can then do when our children are caught up in those big emotions, we've got a vocabulary around, is our glitter swirling around? Have we got lots of thoughts? Do we need to create a bit of space? Do we need to press pause? What's the 90-second strategy that we're going to use? Rather than the inflammatory language that typically happens, which is about taking a deep breath, calm down, you're being a victim of these big feelings. And so that can be a really lovely way of having that shared language. The one thing that I would add is, some of you may be listening to this and thinking, that's a really great analogy, but how do I even begin to have that conversation with my child? Because they just close down. They won't have a conversation around their feelings. My advice is make a glitter jar on your own and place it somewhere in the family area where they are likely to walk past it and to see it, and wait for them to engage with it. What is this? And then just give them a little bit of information. Oh, I read something somewhere about how it's a really great way of explaining our emotions. When we have a big feeling, it's like this. Depending on how much your child engages in that moment will then dictate how far you go with that explanation. If they get into oh my goodness me, that's amazing, tell me more, paraphrasing in some way, then by all means expand. If they just go, oh yeah, that's interesting, and then walk away, just leave it. Leave the glitter jar around and seek moments when they next engage with it and they next ask questions to build on that knowledge, so that we're waiting for them to approach us. We're meeting them where they're at, and we're beginning to slowly equip them with that information. I hope you found that helpful. I know that this is, in the 20 years that I've been using the glitter jar, it has profoundly impacted a lot of young people and their understanding of emotions. As ever, if you have enjoyed this podcast episode, I would be eternally grateful if you could share it with friends, with neighbours, with work colleagues, and anyone who you feel may well benefit, so that we can spread the love. And so, until next time.